Hi there.
Hey, welcome back.
Jason, why are you so excited?
Let's just get on with this.
Oh man, the pigs have to be killed.
Yeah,
Hey, we're working through women into the church.
Yep.
And we've had 4 videos now on
Yes.
various things, and essentially what we've said is that they're ontologically equal, but then different in role,
Right.
different in
Right.
function.
Right.
Both in the church and outside of the church.
Yeah.
There is a biblical role that's
Yeah.
feminine.
Yeah.
So now we come to some other topics. There's actually a couple more that we're going to talk about. What are they?
1 Timothy 3, right? And the issue of deacons and deaconesses, which, a lot of churches that we partner with, we love, we have retreat speakers from, we would be totally in alignment with everywhere, down to the smallest T possible.
Totally.
Have deaconesses. Our church does not. And
Yeah.
other churches that we, are in agreement with don't, obviously. Doctrine in other areas. So what's the biblical argument for or against deaconesses?
Yeah. Okay, good question. Yeah, so the argument all stems from 1 Timothy 3:11.
Yes.
And the word that Paul uses there is women.
Yeah.
NAS translates it that way. That's a good translation.
Sure.
Women must likewise be dignified, not malicious gossips, but temperate, faithful in all things. And the reason why that gets tricky is because from verse 8 to verse 10, and then from verse 12 to verse 13, you have qualifications for deacons. And in the middle of that, you have this term women. And the question is, like, what in the world is going on there?
Yeah.
Is that deaconesses who are then given qualifications inside of this office of deacon?
Right.
Lots of debate.
Yeah,
and
of
this
course.
is an intramural debate for sure.
Yeah,
Somebody
totally.
says, no, women can be deacons. They're not violating the principles that are in 1 Timothy chapter 2.
Yeah.
It's totally fine.
Right.
Our view is that women ought not to be deaconesses.
Yeah. And there is no office of deaconess.
There's no office for that. And the reason for that, there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, the qualifications for a deacon in verses 8 through 10 and 12 and 13 are they mirror the qualifications of elder,
Right.
with the exception of that qualification of teaching. So
Right.
that's pulled out of there.
Right.
But one of the ones that's so important is verse 12. It says, deacons must be husbands of one wife. Well, there you have this qualification that deals with their marital status, and it's the exact same terminology that's used for elders.
Yeah.
Right? So that's one of the qualifications, and it's very evidently a man.
Yeah,
right?
of course.
Now, if you had a woman who could be a deaconess, you say, well, then shouldn't it say about her that she should be the wife of one husband?
Right.
And a lot of people say, well, no, this is just that's like a general category. The problem with that answer is that over in 1 Timothy chapter 5, we have the widows, right? And the widows are actually qualified based on having been the wife of one husband.
Right.
And so you have that exact same language but reversed in the widows in 1 Timothy chapter 5. So if Paul wanted to give an office that included both men and women, he could have very easily said that there needs to be a woman who is the the wife of one husband. But he doesn't put that qualification in there. And so that would tell us that he's not actually talking about women who carry the office of deacon or deaconess.
Yeah.
But it's actually some other category of people, these women who are defined in verse 11 there. The other reason we would say that is that there is an activity. Now, a lot of churches view deacons as anybody who serves in the church is a deacon.
Right.
But we would say that that's actually an office, that the whole church should be serving, but there are some who serve in a specific office.
Right.
Probably the clearest example of that is Acts chapter 6, right? Where you have the first proto-deacons that get identified. And so the question is, what are they doing here? Well, I think these are men who are uniquely qualified, not so much as teachers, but as leaders of ministries.
Right.
They're intended to lead a ministry. They're intended to exercise authority in that way, which then would fall under the prohibition of 1 Timothy chapter 2. Yeah. I don't allow a woman to teach or exercise authority. So both those things are actually qualifications that would be limiting this to just men.
Yeah.
And so we'd say it's just men who should be deacons. For that reason, we would say women. Well, what are women in this verse 11? Well, I would say they're probably the wives of the deacons.
Right.
Why would we say that? Well, in the ancient church, especially in the ancient church in the Near Eastern culture, it would have been very awkward, for example, for a male to go and visit a shut-in female.
Right.
It's culturally inappropriate.
Yeah.
And so what do you have? Well, the wives of those deacons are then attached, and the wives now carry out some of that deacon functionality
Towards
in terms
women.
of caring for the needy, which a woman would then be able to do.
Of course.
And which is why Paul specifically links this with the issues of tongue, right?
Yeah.
She must be dignified. She must act in a righteous way. She must not be a malicious gossip.
Of course.
Right? You can see how that could be a huge problem.
Yeah.
She goes to some
Find out
lady's
about her
house.
life.
And then she's just going to spill all the beans about what's going on
Yeah.
in the church and all that.
Yeah.
Temperate and faithful. So those are all the things that we would expect in a woman who would be able to functionally serve with her husband in this role as a deacon, and then as a deacon's wife.
Yeah.
And so that's actually the way we'd understand that. And actually, I think that's the predominant movement of the church is toward that interpretation. In fact, the ESV translation, which is newer than the New American Standard, says wives, actually. They actually interpret that word away from women and just call it wives.
Even though churches that use the ESV will have deaconesses.
Yeah, exactly.
That's so interesting.
Not to confuse the issue there. But that's I think the basis for that. And then one other argument, which is not as good of an argument, but one other argument from church history is that the word deaconess never even shows up in the New Testament. And in fact, there were no deaconesses in the early church until the 4th century. That category didn't even belong in the church.
Interestingly.
They didn't have it. So I think for us, we just see the church history mirroring what I think the Bible clearly teaches, and we should probably support.
Right. This is not even an argument, but sort of an argument. But it's like there's only one verse.
Yeah,
you
totally.
know, like there's so many other verses around it about male deacons.
Totally, yeah.
It's just sort of like wow, only one verse.
That's odd.
So it's a little odd if it's on the same par.
Yeah, you would expect that to be the case. Yeah, and even some people say, well, all those other qualifications for those deacons also apply to the deaconesses. But the problem is that verse 10 it says these men must also first be tested. So he's clearly identifying a male role, and then there's this one verse there about women.
Right.
He doesn't say deaconesses.
No, he doesn't.
He doesn't say anything else. He just says ladies. Well, that's. I think there he's clearly talking about wives of the deacons.
Which links up nicely with 12. Must be husbands of one wife.
Yeah, it makes total sense, right?
It kind of flows from these men. Okay, there's a little side note here.
Yeah.
You know, the wives need to be da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
They must be husbands of one wife.
One woman man.
Yeah.
Well, that would be, that's the same word, like gune there. So.
Yeah, it just seems to flow better. And church history, wouldn't you say, New Testament, church leadership.
Yeah.
And just leadership like apostles, prophets, who are the elders, leaders of the church.
Yeah, it seems very clear. Yeah, it's male leadership in the church.
And again, not to confine women, not to
No.
oppress women. We want to make that very clear.
The next video we're going to get into that a little bit. One other thing that gets brought up a lot is Phoebe. In Romans chapter 16, verse 1. And it says, and the reason why it gets brought up is because Paul says, I commend to you our sister Phoebe, who is a servant of the church, which is in Cenchrea.
And what word is that?
That's the word deacon. That's the word deacon. And that's what gets so tricky is that he calls Phoebe a deacon.
Yeah.
But the thing is this, that word in Greek means servant.
It doesn't always mean office.
It doesn't always mean office. And Paul calls himself a deacon.
Right.
But he wouldn't say, I'm a servant. I mean, he wouldn't say, I'm the office of the deacon. No. He would say, I'm just being a servant. I've been made a servant, he says, to the Jews and to the Gentiles.
Right.
So when he commends Phoebe, he's not commending her in the office of deacon. He's commending her service.
Right.
And that's where that word needs to be allowed to move that way within those two things, both as the definition of a person who's just a servant, someone who's serving, and also this office that's been ordained by God.
That's really good, helpful. Just to have that kind of hermeneutic, just to remember.
Yeah.
The word doesn't just stay fixed.
Yeah, we don't have to say, well, every time that word shows up, it's the office.
That's great. Very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Hope that's helpful for you. If you have any questions, again, feel free to just email us, info@faithbibleoc.org.